Thank you very much. Hi everybody. Some of you are looking through the names, some of you I know really well, others I don't know. So my name is Bethan, and this website, this presentation is about some of the teaching resources available for glaciation, glaciers and climate change. I'm going to highlight my own website, which is antarcticglaciers.org. I apologise for the really loud helicopter that's just decided to fly over my head. And then I'm going to highlight a few other really excellent teaching resources that are available. So the plan is I just want to introduce myself briefly for those of you who don't know, and then I'm going to just give a very short lecture about glaciers and climate change and why you might want to consider teaching glaciers and climate change, and think about how glaciers are changing today. And then I'm going to talk about the teaching resources available for post-16 education, so the antarcticglaciers.org website and others. It really is focusing on post-16 education and not GCSE and Key Stage 3, although I'd be happy to hear any suggestions on other things. And then there's going to be a discussion and a demonstration of the website, and what I'm really keen is to hear any feedback that people have on how I can make this a more useful and engaging resource for people. So just to introduce myself, my name is Bethan Davies, and I'm a lecturer in geography at Royal Holloway, University of London. So I'm a practicing academic, a research scientist, active research, so I go and do field work and I write papers and I write grants. And the public engagement side of my job is something that I have driven because I think it's really important to communicate science and to communicate the work that we do to the broader public. So my website, Antarctic Glaciers, is really an altruistic project that's really born out of my desire and my enthusiasm for glaciers and my passion for glaciers, and my desire to communicate that more broadly. So let's think about why glaciers are so interesting. Glaciers are a critical part of the Earth system. There are huge ice sheets in Antarctica, there are glaciers all over the world, and they're strongly linked to climate change. Your mountain glaciers are a direct function of precipitation and temperature. So they are keyed in very, very strongly to climate change, which runs through curriculums and schools in pretty much every country. Glaciers and the ice sheets are important for understanding sea level rise. They're important for understanding water resources, and they're also important for understanding hazards. If you live in a country that's ever been glaciated, then understanding glaciers also helps link us to our landscape. It helps us understand the Earth around us. And in schools, we are keen to get students doing quantitative data analysis, doing GIS, doing mapping, using Esri maps online, crunching numbers, drawing graphs. And glaciation gives you lots of examples for really innovative data that you can excite students with. But in my opinion, perhaps the most important reason for studying glaciers and glaciation is that glaciers are just fascinating, they're beautiful, and they're really exciting. They're relevant to us because we are connected to them through the sea level, through our landscape, through our water resources. But if you look at this picture of Malaspina Glacier from Alaska, they're also just really interesting and fascinating. All this like oozy grey and black and white stripes on this glacier. And so I think that's a reason to consider teaching them to students, because I think we can get them really excited. Today, there are two ice sheets. There's the Antarctic Ice Sheet and there's the Greenland Ice Sheet. The Antarctic Ice Sheet is a continent surrounded by an ocean. And if all the ice in Antarctica melted, global sea levels would rise by 58 meters. So we call that the sea level equivalent. So there's a huge amount of ice locked up in Antarctica. And then you have this sea ice that's very ephemeral, that grows and shrinks every summer and winter around Antarctica. In the Northern Hemisphere, we have the Arctic Ocean, which is an ocean surrounded by continents. And we have the Greenland Ice Sheet, which is a little bit smaller than Antarctica, only 7 meters, 7.4 meters sea level equivalent, but still very important because the meltwater from here affects ocean circulation all around the North Atlantic region. And then in these two figures, you can see the bright yellow, and that bright yellow are the glaciers and the ice caps. And in terms of sea level equivalent, it's only about 40 centimetres. It's not very much, and they don't cover very much of the global land surface. But I want to really focus on glaciers and ice caps today because I want to highlight just how important they are. Let's think about the global last glacier maximum. Around 27,000 years ago, global sea levels were about 130 metres lower than they are today. So if you went and stood on the coastline of your country, the sea would be very far away. So you can see in this map that the coastline of the world looks quite different. The glaciers and the ice sheets have grown so much that there is a lot of ice locked up in them. And you can see that all over North America and all over Europe, there are these big ice sheets. There's the Laurentide ice sheet over North America, the Cordilleran ice sheet over here, and then we have this Fennoscandian ice sheet over over Europe. And that takes up about 18.4 metres sea level equivalent, 76 metres sea level equivalent to the Laurentide ice sheet. So this is bigger than the Antarctic ice sheet today. So really, really big ice sheet. If we can look at carbon dioxide, which we can do because we have direct measurements of carbon dioxide from ice cores from Antarctica going back around 800,000 years, we can look at how much the carbon dioxide has changed. And we can see that the carbon dioxide has gone up and down, up and down, up and down over the last 800,000 years. The previous highest concentrations were around 300 parts per million when we had a world similar to today, an interglacial environment with just two small ice sheets. And then we have these low periods of carbon dioxide where we have these big ice ages. At the global last glacier maximum, carbon dioxide was 185 parts per million. The pre-industrial carbon dioxide was 280 parts per million. So an increase of about 100 parts per million was enough to raise global sea levels by 130 metres and melt all of this ice. In 1958, observations were 315 parts per million, so already higher than had been previously observed in the ice core record. And in 2018 and in 2019, there have been new records. And in 2020, we will probably again have another new record. So carbon dioxide in 2019 was 411 parts per million. And we have to go back millions of years to a much warmer world to see carbon dioxide of that level. So if carbon dioxide has changed so much between the LGM and today, then what does this huge increase in carbon dioxide mean for glaciers and the ice sheets in the world today? How will today's ice masses react? Here you can see global temperatures. These are the warming stripes, global temperatures over the last 2,000 years, the last 2019 years since the year zero. And you can see they're getting very dark red, very, very warm. And here you can see the IPCC assessment report from assessment report 5, and these are projections of sea level. So we have an increase in sea level in line with this increasing temperatures over the last 2,000 years. So you can see the sea level's been stable until about 1900 when it starts to increase. And now we have projections that are quite varied. There was quite a big range of projections. So how do we guess or better predict what will happen in the future? Well, first we have to understand how ice masses behave, and then we have to understand how they're changing, and then we can use these data sets to improve our predictions of future ice mass behavior. One of the first fundamental things that we have to know about ice is that it's a liquid and it flows down slope. It's a very, very viscous, sticky, slow-moving liquid, but ice deforms and moves down slope. Here you can see the ice in this image. These are from the Karakoram, and you can see the ice is slowly moving downhill. The ice is deforming under its own weight. So ice is gained in the upper parts of the mountains, and then it's transferred down the mountain to the bottom. So here you can see in this picture, you can hopefully see the snow, which is the bright white in this satellite image. The snow is being deposited on the upper parts of the glaciers, and as you have layers and layers of snow building up, that snow is being compressed into ice, and it's deforming under its own weight and flowing away downhill. You can also see these dark debris bands here. These are the medial moraines, where you've got two glaciers joining. Here's one glacier joining, and here's another glacier joining. So glaciers flow downslope. Glaciers gain and lose mass. And I've got here some really fantastic graphics from the OGGN website. So I strongly recommend you have a look, because they explain how glaciers gain and lose mass. So firstly, glaciers gain mass through the process of accumulation. Snow falls onto a glacier. So you can see the glacier here, the little blue arrows representing that accumulation of snow falling onto the glacier. And glaciers also lose mass by the process of ablation. So the ice melts. We've all had a cold drink with ice cubes on a hot day, and we've observed those ice cubes melting. So ice melts, and as mountains are generally warmer at the bottom and cooler at the top, it's melting more at the bottom and less at the top. So here you have the ice melting. If we look at the net change in mass across the glacier, you have areas with net gain and areas with net loss. So in this glacier, you've got net gain in the accumulation area and net loss in the ablation area. So net gain in the blue, net loss in the red. So you have this mass balance, which is the balance between accumulation and ablation. Equilibrium line is that line in the middle of the glacier where accumulation and ablation are equal. So the mass balance is 0. If the temperatures increase, then the ablation area will grow. The ablation area, the proportion of the glacier with net melt, will be larger. And so that means the ELA will be higher. If this happens, the glacier will retreat. So the ice is still continuing to flow. The ice is still flowing down slope, but the ELA has moved up the glacier and the glacier is shrinking. Worldwide, glaciers are shrinking. This is an example of Columbia Glacier in Alaska. These are Landsat imagery from 1986 to 2019. And you can see that this glacier has shrunk. I've got approximately annual images of this glacier here. And you can see the really rapid recession of this very, very big glacier. This is the pattern we are seeing worldwide. Glaciers are losing more mass each winter, each summer, than is being replaced each winter. In the ablation season, they're not gaining as much as they're losing in the ablation season. And this really is the story worldwide. So these circles represent the volume of ice lost between 1961 and 2016. So the bigger the circle, the more ice has been lost. If the circle is green, then there's been a gain. So you can see there is one very small part of the world with a slight gain. This is probably due to changing monsoon patterns, but pretty much everywhere else in the world, glaciers are losing mass. And the total global loss of ice is 9,000 gigatons. A gigaton is 1 billion tons. So that's 9,000 billion tons of ice is being lost between 1961 and 2016. The annual loss of glaciers worldwide is about 260 gigatons, 260 billion tons of ice. And 360 gigatons of ice will raise global sea levels by approximately 1 millimeter when it's averaged over the entire ocean. So about 2/3 of a millimeter of sea level rise per year just from glacier melt. And this really is without precedent. These figures are from the World Glacier Monitoring Service Bulletin from 2020, which was just published a few days ago. And you can see the mass change, the mass loss. Mass balance is the sum of accumulation and ablation, and you can see that it has been negative in almost every year since 1950. Just a couple of particularly good years, but generally has been negative in almost every year. And the cumulative mass change is strongly downwards. So these glaciers each year are losing more mass than they're gaining. And I think this trend is also increasing. These glaciers are out of balance. Even if we stopped warming the climate today and we didn't have any further warming, these glaciers are still going to lose mass. They're still going to shrink because they're not in balance with climate. And these rates of mass loss are without precedent. We don't think we've seen this in the historical era or even longer. Why are these important? I mean, 2/3 of a millimetre of sea level rise doesn't seem very much. I could go stand on the beach and that could wash over my feet and I wouldn't even notice. One reason why it's important is because glaciers are important providers of water resources. And we can think about glaciers in terms of peak water. Glaciers are a useful buffer. They store water. You can think of them as a reservoir, a big icy cold reservoir. So glaciers store this water. As the snow falls onto the glacier, it stays there in the mountain and it's released as a steady trickle of water throughout the ablation season, throughout the dry season or throughout the summer. So these glaciers and snowpacks are providing water to downstream areas. And as the glaciers shrink and they melt, the amount of water they produce increases, so they produce more water. But as the glaciers eventually shrink past a certain threshold, the amount of water they produce decreases because there's not much volume of ice in the reservoir. And so we have this concept of peak water. So here you can see we have rising air temperatures along the bottom and declining glacier volume in green. And we have melt water that increases and then it decreases. And the annual runoff increases and then decreases. So over time, glaciers will produce peak water and then they will no longer produce quite so much water. So it's maybe boom time. You can irrigate more crops, you can grow more avocados, you can irrigate more fields, but eventually you won't be able to rely on this resource. And so droughts and dry years become much more significant and you're more likely to suffer from water stress. Global peak water has already happened in many places. So this map is a map of the world and the shading is the river basins and the colours are glaciers. And you can see the colours relate to the timing of peak water. So if it's red, peak water was in about 1980, orange was in about 2010, and bright yellow, peak water is maybe still to come, 2020 to 2030. And if it's blue, it's off in the future. And you can see that in many parts of North America, we're pretty red. This peak water has already happened. Patagonia, the Rabel, the Baker, these are all very red. Peru, we have in Bolivia and Peru and places, we've already passed peak water. And what's absolutely critical is in the Himalaya. We've already reached peak water in many places in the Himalaya, which are places where many people are reliant on these water. And in fact, if you look at the populations of these basins, they house about 1/3 of the world's population. So many places are vulnerable to changes in glacier recession and water supplies. Here's an example from Patagonia. So we already have significant recession. Okay, so here are the circles. The size of the circle is the glaciated area, and the size of the pink circle is the mass balance. So it's looking at elevation change. So if it's a large pink circle, glaciers are losing more mass than if it's a small circle. And the mass loss is around 19 billion tons per annum, which is about 0.5 millimetre of sea level rise per year. And these glaciers have already passed peak meltwater. So peak water is already passed for many of these glaciers. And in these river basins on the east, we have increasing water stress, decreased ability for hydropower, irrigation, and water stress. These projections are for different climate scenarios. In blue, it's RCP 2.6, which is approximately equal to about 1.5 degrees of warming by 2100 AD. So this is the Paris Agreement. This is where we would like to be, 1.5 degrees C of warming. We're about 1.1 degrees now. So if you see if we stick to this 1.5 degrees of warming, we remain with most of our glaciers in Patagonia. We don't lose all of the area. We don't lose all of the volume. RCP 4.5 is in light blue. and RCP 8.5 is in red. So RCP 4.5 is the trajectory we're more or less on at the moment, and RCP 8.5 is the extreme high-end, high emission scenario. So we're probably looking at a significant loss of ice in the southern Andes under this projection, and also on this projection. If we look at the concept of the Patagonian glaciers as water towers, as buffers of water, these sources of water in dry periods, you can see that the more important ones are darker blue. You can see these water towers here are coloured quite dark blue, and they're vulnerable. And they're vulnerable to changes in population, changes in GDP, and changes in temperature and precipitation. And so we need to conserve and act to preserve these glaciers for the good of the societies that depend on them. They're vulnerable to changes in mean annual precipitation and to increasing demands. So increase in population, increase in GDP will increase demands on these water towers. This is the Himalaya, and these red bars are the observed glacier thinning for reference glaciers across the Himalaya. So these glaciers are shrinking, they're thinning. The snouts are maybe not terminating very quickly, receding very quickly, but they are thinning lower. And if we look at the projected area, again, in red, we have RCP 8.5, in blue, we have RCP 2.6. If we stay with 1.5 degrees centigrade of warming, we retain most of these glaciers. Whereas if we have for RCP 4.5, we're losing about 50% of these glaciers by area by 2100. Okay, so in terms of comparison to 2014, not 2000, but 2014, we could be losing significant amounts of our glaciarized area under the higher emissions scenarios. These are some of the demands of water, just to show you how important these glaciers are. So we have in blue these circles, the dark blue are the installed capacity of hydroelectric power. And over here on this side, we have irrigation. So this is the irrigation development in India. And you can see that these glaciers are actually providing water that is supporting the hydropower and irrigation in the dry season in this area. And again, we see the Indus is the world's most important water tower. The Indus is the world's most important water tower, both in terms of supply, it's supplying lots and lots of water, but also in terms of demand. It is highly used by downstream societies and by downstream ecosystems. These mountains are supplying water through precipitation, glaciers and snow, and the downstream areas are densely populated, heavily irrigated. There are 250 million people dependent on these water towers in this part of the world. Already the water gap is significant, and we are already drawing up unsustainably groundwater to close that water gap. And again, these glaciers are vulnerable. They're vulnerable to changes in population, GDP, temperature and precipitation. GDP is projected to increase, population is projected to increase, and that will increase demand, but temperatures are also projected to increase, and that will decrease the volume of the glaciers and contribute to decreasing meltwater availability. If we want to conserve these glaciers, it's really important to maintain warming to about 1.5 degrees centigrade, because the majority of the ice volume will remain under 1.5 degrees C. So this here we have RCP 2.6 in blue. This is the lower end emission scenario, aggressive mitigation, and we have RCP 8.5 in red. This is the very high end emissions. We're probably not on the RCP 8.5 trajectory, but we're also not on the RCP 2.6 trajectory. And there is a significant mass loss of glaciers by 2100 under RCP 8.5, but under RCP 2.6, the mass loss of glaciers is much less significant. How close are we to maintaining this? These are figures from the IPCC report. They show the current warming rate. We're projected to bypass 1.5 degrees centigrade by about 2040 AD, and under our current warming rate, we need to be taking action now if we want to change the outcomes, if we want to change this. These are the pathways. The limiting warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade is getting increasingly difficult. Given cumulative emissions through to 2019, we have to crash our carbon emissions and undertake carbon storage, carbon capture, if we want to reduce warming to this critical 1.5 degrees C of warming. So just to take home, globally glaciers are shrinking. It's unprecedented, it's global, it's worldwide. They're losing billions and billions of tons, hundreds of billions of tons of ice per year, related to increasing global temperatures, especially in mountain regions. They provide water to 1.9 billion people worldwide. And these water resources are threatened as the mountain water tides reach peak water, with contribution to glaciers downstream declining in many parts of the world already. So we predict increased water stress, but with supply decreases, especially in the dry season. If we can follow a lower CO2 emissions pathway and stay within 1.5 degrees centigrade of warming, we may avoid these worst impacts and ensure better water security for millions of people. But that does mean CO2 must be reduced to net zero, according to the IPCC models, by 2050. It is my belief that glaciers and climate change fit in many parts of the A-level system. They can link into concepts on climate change and hazards and risks on water security. And then there is also the glacial land systems, glaciated landscapes section of the UK post-16 syllabus and the post-16 education syllabuses in other countries as well. Most of these syllabuses have things on glaciers as natural systems, glaciers with mass balance, glacier flow, glaciers balancing accumulation and ablation, and they have something on landscapes. So they have something on geomorphology, processes, abrasion and plucking, deposition, tills. People need, to study this, they need case studies from the UK and from abroad, international case studies. And post-16 education also requires the students to do geospatial mapping skills. It requires them to make observations and measurements, data manipulation, statistical skills. And certainly we require case studies and examples. It seems to me from talking to teachers that many people are not choosing to teach glaciers. And I think this is a real shame because they are so exciting and also so important. So I wanted to highlight some resources that are available to support teachers of post-16 education. So the first is my own website. It is a bit like an online textbook. I set this up in 2012 as part of a personal mandate to promote public understanding of science. So this is an altruistic effort, and this is something I've been maintaining for many years now. I was really pleased to be awarded a Certificate of Excellence in Geological Education back in June, and I've received funding and support from a wide range of organisations. I run the website at a loss. It's never going to make me rich, but I have had support for which I'm very grateful from a number of organisations, and that has enabled me to really build the resources that are available here. And over the last few years, I've been trying to make this more useful for people teaching the post-16 knowledge content of glaciers and glaciation, because I see you as people who are working at the coalface of education and working with our young people, the future. The website has a school advisory board of expert teachers who have helped guide and shape the content of the website. And I've also been working with the Geographical Association. And I've had regular focus groups and interviews from teachers. And if any teacher here wants to get in touch, then I'd be very grateful. Everything is completely free. I feel very strongly about keeping this free, and I won't even have adverts on the website because I don't want anything on there that jeopardizes this. And everything is written by experts. All the articles are well supported by references, links to further reading and interactive resources, so that you can see, you can fact check, you can see where the data is coming from, and everything is very clear. Articles that are accessible, or perhaps more accessible for post-16 education, are flagged as A-level. If you are a teacher working in Europe or North America, then you could read post-16 instead of A-level. I haven't written much for younger students, 13-year-olds and upwards, because it's not really my area of expertise, but I have been developing these more introductory articles. There are also articles on here that are slightly more complex. Some will be perhaps more suitable for undergraduates, and some will probably be more suitable for postgraduates and professional researchers. Quite often I'll just write something because I'm interested in it and I've been thinking about it a lot at the time, and so I will decide to write an article about it. There are articles on glacial geology, there are articles on glacial landscapes. We have glacial land systems with examples worldwide, and case studies from the Patagonian Ice Sheet and the British Ice Sheet, and we even have a section on glaciers on Mars. So we have some glacial land systems articles and a whole section on Patagonia with plenty of information about landforms, land systems, and also an interactive map. So this is the interactive map. This is a result, an output from a paper that was published in 2020. I was the lead author of this paper, and it is a compilation of all the glacial geomorphology and all the published ages in Patagonia, and it's all there in an Esri ArcGIS online website that you can explore and browse. So there are explanatory articles on the website, and then you can click through onto the PatIce interactive map and explore that landscape. There are also a huge number of external resources available, and so I've started to curate these. So this is a list of resources that I found. These are all interactive resources. I'm going to just highlight a few that I think are particularly good, but you can come here and I update this regularly, and if you have any suggestions, if you know a great resource that's not included, then do let me know. And also you can interact with me and my team on the website. So we have things like an Ask a Scientist function. If you ask me a question, I will try and answer it, or my team will try and answer it. You can comment on blogs, my email address is on there, you can tweet me, you can write to me, and I will engage with you in that way. And I have a really good database of questions that people have been asking. There are also a section on study skills. There's things on careers. People ask me, how do I become a glaciologist? And so there's sections on that. There is information on the A-level syllabus and how the different pages link into that. There's study skills, essay writing skills, dissertation writing skills, project skills that you can look at. These are some resources that are not produced by me, that are nothing to do with me, but that I think are excellent and well worth a visit as well. So there's things like the Glaciers online website by Jörg Allian and Mike Hambry. Mike is an expert in Antarctica and has been on goodness knows how many Antarctic expeditions as well as Arctic expeditions. He's probably visited more glaciers than anybody else in the world. And he's produced this website. Mike is also a very gifted photographer, and if you ever want nice, beautiful photographs of glaciers, then this is the place to come. I've learned a lot about photography by copying Mike and going where he goes and standing where he goes and trying to take the same photograph, and it's never as good as his, but there are some lovely photographs that he's made available for free on his website. There is the Virtual Glaciers website. This allows you to do a virtual field trip. You can hike up a glacier from your valley, from your living room, from your schoolroom, and there is guided fieldwork here. This is by Des McDougall, and he's done a fantastic job of taking a 360-degree camera up a glacier, and he's taken these 360-degree views. So you can go from point to point and zoom all around and observe all the glacial landforms and all the glaciological features on the ice. There are examples from the UK and worldwide. He's building up a fantastic database. This is the OGGM Edu website, and I think Fabian, who designed this, is in the audience. So perhaps you might like to get in touch with him, or he might like to comment on this. But Fabian and his team have made some really great interactive resources that you can investigate for yourself. So there is a glacier gallery. You can click and see the different kinds of glaciers, and you can explore all the glaciers. He also has a simulator, so you can do a simple model. You don't have to know any programming. It all runs in your browser, and this is a great way for students to experiment with things like increasing the temperature and seeing what happens to the glacier. We have the Pat Ice website, which I've already highlighted to you. So you can hopefully see the GIF of glacier changing, and there's lots of information here to support that. And there's also the Brit Ice map. So if you've not already observed this, there is a database of landforms for the British Ice Sheet as well. And so you can explore all these. There's also a map or a poster that you can get delivered to your school and put up to show all the glacial landforms of Britain. This is led by Chris Clark, who's a professor of glaciology at Sheffield University. The WGMS have a glacier explorer. You can browse the glaciers here and you can see the data that they have on things like mass balance, thickness, glacier front recession, and all sorts of things. So these numbers here in orange refer to the number of data points. So one glacier might have 4 data points: mass balance, frontal variations, thickness changes, and things like that. So you can zoom in on Alaska and find a particular glacier and explore the data that the WGMS, the World Glacier Monitoring Service, houses on this. So this is an absolutely fantastic resource. You can also download all of the world's reference glacier mass balance data, which might make a useful student project if you wanted them to do some quantitative data analysis. So that brings me to the end. I think what I'd like now is some feedback. I'd like to know if you have any questions for me. I would like to know what you need and want. I would like to know, can we be of more help? And please do get in touch. My contact details are there, so that we can open the floor to questions now, if there are any.
Well, while waiting for questions, first of all, I'd like to say thank you, Bethan. Fantastic overview of the whole subject area there, but terrific tour of the websites, not just yours, but others. I'm seeing a few messages coming in at the moment. Gordon saying that was really great. First questions is from Mel Sandals. Thanks, Bethan. Lots of great things. Which sections of your website get the most visits?
Right, I'll bring this up. So I get, I track the traffic to my website using, can you see the website? Is that coming up?
Yes, we can see that.
Yeah, so I track traffic to my website using Google Analytics. One of the most popular pages is my section on ice cores. This gets a lot of traffic. This is one of the top, I'm fixing this. I want related articles not to be the same as the ones up here, so I'm fixing this, I'm working on that. But the ice cores are very, very popular. I also have articles on marine ice sheet instability and Pine Island Glacier that are very, very popular, that get a lot. Probably some of the most popular pages are some of the study skills as well, probably because they're a little bit more generic. So people search for research design, they search for essay writing, and these pages get a lot of traffic as well. These study skills pages get a lot of hits, probably because they're broader search terms. So yeah, I think those are probably the most popular: Pine Island Glacier, ice cores, study skills, research design.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Hopefully that answered Mel's question. The next one has actually come to me privately. If I can remind everybody, please send your questions to everybody. Send your chat to everybody, and everybody can see the chat. But I'll read this one out. This is from, it's scrolling up, there's so many coming in so fast. This is from M. Hock. Wow, an awesome resource. Teaching will be enriched by these, even for GCSE students. Thank you very much. Oh, Melinda Hock. Thank you, Melinda. S. Wright to everybody. Thank you so much for your lecture. My school are reluctant to teach glaciation at any level, which is a real shame, as we are in the Lake District.
Oh, that's awful. You must petition.
Yes, definitely. Follows on, but I'd like to keep in touch with glaciation and keep my subject knowledge up to date. I think we need to have some kind of a global push there to bring glaciation back onto curricula. From Kath Owens. Thanks, Bethan. Some excellent resources. Something that would be really useful is synoptic links to other areas such as carbon cycles, as well as to links to climate change, which obviously you tackled earlier. Do you have any specific information on links, or I think maybe or link to carbon stores and flows as glaciers are changing?
I'm not sure I've written anything very specific on that. I have articles on climate change. So if you go to Glaciers and Climate, there is a specific article on climate change. And there are also specific articles on things like Antarctic ice sheet mass balance and global glacier recession. And they're both, I think both of them would fit into a teaching on climate change. I also have something on sea level rise. I have a large number of resources on sea level rise. You can see there are a variety of articles here. So you can link sea level rise very clearly into climate change. I also have some information on carbon on glacier ice. So there are some articles here on carbon storage and how glaciers are darkening, changing carbon storage on them. But I think perhaps we could do better at carbon flows and the carbon cycle and linking this into climate change. This isn't something that I have specifically or explicitly written about.
Excellent, thank you. Our next question is from Laura Jo, and Laura Jo asks, do you have any advice for teaching pupils that start glaciation at A level without doing it at GCSE? Are there any useful starting points that aren't too overwhelming?
Right, well, so if you, I know that this is a common problem and that students are getting to study glaciation for the first time at A level. And I think one thing that students often struggle to understand is mass balance and the concept of ice flow. This is often something that students find really difficult. So if you go into the glacier processes page, there are some nice, friendly, not too complicated introductory articles about mass balance. They don't have any scary maths in, and they avoid too much information at once. So they would be useful to go to. And I think you can look through this brand new page. I made it this morning, Mass Balance Teaching Resources, following a discussion with someone. And they have the World GMS Glacier browser, and you don't need any experience in GIS to use this. And I think that could be something that would be quite engaging for students, because they can see the glaciers are all shrinking, and that can be quite helpful. I think also the OGGM resources have some nice things where you can click on a map and see a picture of a glacier. And I think that's quite introductory and nice and friendly and easy to get started with. So all of those things might be helpful.
Thanks, Bethan. I'll just add at this point, for everybody's information, we are recording this webinar and it will be available on the SEDS online website soon. So if anybody's frantically trying to write down all the notes of Bethan's answers to the questions, don't worry, you can replay it in a few days' time and write at your leisure. Right, okay, moving on. Elizabeth Battram. I'm teaching glaciation for the first time in September, and this looks like an invaluable resource. Thank you. What is the most common or biggest misconception you come across?
So I have a section on misconceptions, my misconceptions. And the first, nothing lives on glaciers. People think that glaciers are dead, white, flat things. So they think nothing lives on them, but there's actually a lot of life on glaciers. And people think that glaciers are white, and glaciers are often not white. They can be blue, they can be black, they can be brown, they can be multicolored, they can be stripy. So there's lots of information on glaciers. People get confused about flow versus recession. So people get very confused about what we mean by glaciers receding or advancing, and whether they are still flowing or not. And sometimes people get so confused they think glaciers flow back uphill. So that's something that I think comes into this concept of mass balance and needing to make sure the students are well grounded in mass balance and understand mass balance really well. Something that I see persistently wrong is confusion between ice shelves, icebergs, sea ice, ice sheets, all of this. Even in reputable newspapers, people talk about the Antarctic ice sheet is growing. It's not, it's shrinking. The sea ice is growing. People get very confused between floating sea ice, floating ice shelves, grounded ice in Antarctica. And I think that is understandably very, very complicated. And so there is a nice web page that supports this with some nice pictures of different kinds of ice. So there's lots of information there.
Thank you. Okay, Gordon Carruthers, this may make sense to you. I'm not sure for me. You may find it useful to link to parts of the different specs.
Yeah, okay. So do you mean that, like linking to the ACR syllabus versus the AQA syllabus versus the OCR syllabus?
That's what I'm guessing, Gordon.
Like
yeah.
Yeah, so if you go into students and geography A-level, this is a bit UK focused because I was funded by geography A-level. There is an information on the geography curriculum with links to the different pages, so you can see the links that are coming up there. And also just on the home page, so that links specifically the curriculum to the content on the website. There's a page called A-level on the home page, and this is an automated page. This updates automatically, but it's a list of everything I've tagged as A-level. So you can see there are a list of articles here, and so you could quickly scan this to see what is useful and what is relevant to you. But in terms of mapping content onto the syllabus, take a look at the students page, take a look under the geography A-level tab, and there are links here to the A-level syllabus and links to the specific pages that are worth looking at.
Thank you. Next question is from Jay Abbott. Excellent presentation. Do you have any recommended links to periglacial environments?
Periglaciation is something that is badly covered on the website. There is a couple of articles on periglaciation, but they're probably not that good for A-level students. It's based on some papers that I've read, that I've written. That's something that we can definitely do better at. I'm not a periglacial expert myself. I'm a glacial geologist rather than a periglacial geologist. So that's something that we'll be trying to get more content for soon.
Great, thank you. Next question is from TP Davis. It's a bit of a long one, so bear with me. We teach glaciers at A-level, OCR, and we have found pupils are keen to take on glaciation-based fieldwork. However, not all centres can access relic or active glaciated landscapes. With the stipulation that pupils must spend 4 days in the field and collect primary data, this rules out remote fieldwork using WGMS, for example. This can make fieldwork on glaciers and glaciated landscapes inaccessible for some pupils and for some centres. How would you suggest A-level pupils carry out fieldwork on glaciated landscapes in the UK under these restrictions?
Fieldwork is so important for learning, and I am a huge proponent of fieldwork. I love getting in the field myself. Certainly I was inspired by going into the field as a young scientist myself. If you cannot get to somewhere like the Lake District or the Brecon Beacons or the Pennines or something like that, that has very, very clear evidence of glaciation, but you can get to the coast, you can often find really good examples of glacial sediments and coastal cliff exposures. So just in England, all around the coast of Norfolk, there are fantastic cliff sections that are better than almost anywhere else in the world. If you're in Europe, in the centre, in the very flat lands in the centre, there are quarries that have wonderful exposures of beautifully cryotubated sediments, and students can have a great time measuring stones and stone orientation and sketching and making photographs and annotated sketches and things. So all of that can be really, really helpful. So if they need to do fieldwork, does that mean things like virtual fieldwork won't count? They need to actually be in the field making observations, but you're struggling to get there.
It does sound like
4 days.
Yeah, from reading this, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess sometimes you just have to say, well, if you want to go and see a cirque, we do have to go to a mountain. If you want to see a moraine, it is a lot easier to see them if you're somewhere with moraines. So that it may be a case that you may have to travel if you're living Well, where we live in Royal Holloway in Egham. We are not close to glacial landforms, so I take my students to the Tees Valley, where there's fantastic glacial geomorphology, but it's a good 4 or 5 hours in a minibus. We do that for a weekend. That may be, if you can't get to the coast to see the cliffy sections because you're right in the southern coast, for example, then that might be the best thing. I mean, if you get in contact with me personally and suggest where you are, I might be able to suggest some sites that you could get to that are closer.
Great, thank you. Another message from Gordon Carruthers. Basically, just a straight message to you. I work for the Harris Federation. I can speak to you after the seminar. Sorry, I can speak to you after the seminar about possibly doing a CPD session for us. So,
oh, that'd be lovely. I'm happy to do that. That'd be
draw
great.
your attention to that.
Yeah.
Chris, thanks for this. Having heard Bethan speak a couple of times, including for us a few years ago at the High Wheel GA, I really appreciate her website and willingness to share her expertise. I also back up Kath's point of view about carbon cycle links. So
okay, clearly this is an important article I need to write.
It is. Neil Collins, great talk and really useful, thanks. I would love to take scientists on a field trip in the UK, but I'm unsure of what field data they could collect or places to visit that would be good to examine things like striation marks or to understand flow direction. Are there any good location resources that are specific to field trips that are not paid for?
In terms of free, I think the best thing to do first would be to look at the Brit Ice map and see where you are with respect to the Brit Ice map. And then you can get in, you can sort of work out where the landforms are that are maybe accessible to you. The next thing to do that's sadly not free is to look at the QRA website. So QRA is the Quaternary Research Association, and they have field guides. So you can, I think some of them you can download as a PDF for a small charge. Some of them you can buy as a book. Essentially, the field guide is a handbook that tells you all about the glacial geomorphology or the, well, it's quaternary science, so some of it will be people and interglacial stuff, but that it tells you what the title is and what the table of contents are. So those field guides are a great resource. The Geologists Association has field guides. The Geological Society have field guides. So I think if you were planning to set up a field trip and run it for a few years, then it might well be worth investing in a field guide. There is a small cost involved with that, but it only tends to be 20 quid or less. But there are, there's lots of local organisations. The other thing to do is to get in touch with your local branch of the Geologists Association. So there are Geologists Associations dotted around the country. Some of them are affiliated with the Geological Society of London. They all have lectures, and you can go to these lectures and engage with them, and there will be lots of local expertise there about places you can go to see glacial geomorphology of various kinds.
Excellent.
You can also, sorry, one other thing you can look at, I just remembered, is the QRA have a top 50 sites. Top 50 sites page. So they have an outreach website and they have top 50 quaternary sites. There's a booklet that you can download and you can click on all these sites all over the UK and you can see information about them. And there's information about what they are and all sorts of things. So I think most people should be able to get to one of these. They're fairly evenly scattered across the UK. And there's a lot of work that went into this top 50 sites webpage. I was involved with the QRA at the time. And so you should be able to maybe find something interesting here to go and look at.
Super. Right, moving on. Laura, this has been very interesting. Thank you. Do you have any suggestions of how to make use of more GIS skills in teaching glaciation?
Absolutely. It depends how far you want to take it. There is so much you can do. A really simple exercise might be to use the mapping tools in Google Earth. So you can open up Google Earth and there are tools to map polygons and polylines. And you can map moraines, glacier structures, glacier change. There's historical imagery in there, so you can map glacier change. So there's plenty of easy things that you can do there. You could easily go to somewhere like Alaska or somewhere like Patagonia, where there is fantastic glacial geomorphology, and get the students mapping moraines and landforms and medial moraines and glaciers and all sorts of things. They'd have a great time doing that. You can look at the Pat Ice website or the Brit Ice website. So here is the Pat Ice website, and you can get the students to look at all the geomorphology here and explore that really rich database. You can look at the Brit Ice website and do the same thing. On my resources for teachers things, I have a page on glacial geomorphology and GIS resources, and also a page on exploring present day glaciers in a GIS. So there's lots of suggestions here. You can introduce digital elevation models with this fantastic tool. This downloads all the SRTM within the view, so it has the global digital elevation model, and you can explore what happens with elevation change and things. So that's quite exciting and easy to use.
Wow, quite a lot of resources then. Excellent. Gordon Carruthers, another question from Gordon. Do you have anything on the basic glacial processes? I'm thinking my KS3 students would really benefit from it. Okay, so by glacial basic processes, do you mean things like erosion and transportation and things? So we have some nice introductory pages on subglacial erosion and cirques that are not too complicated. They start nice and basic, and we have some lovely photographs and some nice figures about quarrying and plucking that have been drawn specifically for the website by Jake. So you can hopefully look at that, and that might be introductory for your earlier stage students. Okay, I'm going to apologise in advance for my pronunciation. The next message is from Enaut, and it's I think just a message. Thanks a lot, Bethan. Great presentation. Good to see and listen to you from the Pyrenees in this Corona times. Although I'd love to see you again in Patagonia sooner rather than later. Yeah, looking forward to seeing you too. AM Sebert, I think the name is here. Thank you. This has been really interesting. Is there anything on your website about the concept of dynamic equilibrium in relation to glaciers? Dynamic equilibrium in relation to the glaciers, do you mean things like the equilibrium line altitude? Or do you mean like mass balance gradient more? We ask Sevet to reply to that, and we'll come back to that one later. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I find the terms used are slightly different, but we have information here on the equilibrium line altitude and the dynamic equilibrium and the dynamic velocity required to maintain that equilibrium glacier. So I think that's what you're talking about. And there's information here on the dynamic velocity required. And there's, under glacier flow, there is lots of information here on dynamic velocities and how ice flows. There's a little bit of maths here, but it's not too hard, so people don't need to panic. But there's things on dynamic glacier flow required to maintain ice velocity and things. Excellent. Quick message from Olivia Walters. Thank you very much. Great seminar. TP Davis. Thank you, Bethan. On the note of virtual fieldwork, you can collect data from websites, etc. I've heard it from Shelley at OCR. It is effectively collecting remote data. You just have to manipulate the data for it to count. Okay, so a virtual field trip could be mapping in Google Earth then, something like that. Yeah. Which allows you to go anywhere. From M Rochester, thank you for your time. Great talk. The range of resources was also particularly useful. If you have any suggestions of simple in-class demonstrations, experiments of glacial processes and landforms. Yeah, I think there's plenty. So again, I direct you to the resources for teachers, because there's lots here that you can bring up on screen. But there's also, you know, little films, little videos within the website that you can look at. But under resources for teachers, you can bring up perhaps these various things and demonstrate them on the screen. And so that can be quite useful.
That way you don't all have to go and trek to a computer room, or each student doesn't have to have a laptop computer or anything like that. So I think most of these should work with you demonstrating them.
Excellent. And we've had a reply from, I'm sorry if I'm not sure if your name is AM Sevet or Amsevet, but the AQA spec has systems, sorry, to quote, systems in physical geography, systems, concepts and their application to the development of glaciated landscapes, inputs, outputs, energy, stores and components, flows and transfers, positive, negative feedback, dynamic equilibrium.
Yeah, so I've always interpreted that as being about mass balance and glacier flow. So this concept of glaciers as a system, I've always thought about mass balance, the glaciers receiving mass, storing mass, and losing mass and transferring that mass. So there is a process of transportation of mass down the glacier, gained at the top, lost at the bottom. So that's how I've always interpreted that. So there's a number of things here that support that. And then in terms of inputs and outputs, I think what you really want to look at is the glacial land systems pages, because these are systems. This is a type of glacier and a type of system. So you could think about a clean glacier, a clean valley glacier as a system, and you could think about these kinds of valley glaciers as producing typical characteristic landscapes with characteristic landforms and sediments. So you have your outputs perhaps of moraines, trim lines, hills, ice-scoured bedrock and things like that.
Super. That was from Anne-Marie. She's confirmed.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, that's ended the questions. We haven't got any more questions at this stage, but that was a lot to get through there. So, oh no, we've so in answer to your question, no, we've got one more. If you're okay, Bethan, to do another one.
Yep.
Okay. Fabian. So this is a message to Anne-Marie. I think your question relates to the glaciers that are neither advancing nor receding, are stationary. And then he sent a reference there. So there's a web link for Anne-Marie. Okay.
Okay, fine. Yeah, good.
Okay.
Thanks, Fabian.
Thank you, Fabian. Right. Okay. I think we'll probably draw a line. Oh, how can you get in contact with? Gordon's asking desperately, how can I get in contact?
How can you get in contact with me? If you go to the About page and click on my author profile, there is lots of information about how you can get in contact with me. There's my departmental webpage, my website, my departmental website, and there's my email address is on here somewhere. I've got an email address somewhere, so you can get in contact there. So just go to my departmental webpage and there will be you'll see lots of information about me in there.
You're eminently searchable on Google as well.
Yeah, just type my name in.
Gordon says he'll be in contact.
Thanks, Gordon. Look forward to it. Oh, look, my email address is here. Look, there it is, right at the top there. So you can email me on either of my email addresses there.
Okay, well, I think we'll wrap it up there. So again, thanks very much, Bethan, for presenting this. I think there's a lot of appreciation in the community, across the very wide community here.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting.
And yeah, no problem at all. Just to remind people, in a few days' time, as quickly as I can get it edited, we'll have this presentation and the question and answers afterwards will all be on the SEDS online website and available for anybody to view at any time. I have to thank at the end, as well as Bethan, I have to thank the IIS as well, the IIS, the International Association of Sedimentologists, for sponsoring SEDS Online and giving us the money to make these things available for free. So thank you, Bethan, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for all the feedback and comments.